So today we will learn the concept of constructor overloading. So now what is this constructor overloading is all about? In the previous class I was discussing about what is constructor in C++. So today I will talk about a scenario whenever in a single class we have more than one constructor. For an example, say I have one specific class, say A. Now within this class, say we have more than one constructor, and we know that the name of the constructor should be same with the class name in which it belongs to. So this is one constructor, and the constructor will look like a function in C++. For that reason, constructor is also known as specialized function. Now here within a single class, I will define more than one constructor. So in this case, whenever we have more than one constructor within a single class, it is known as constructor overloading. But here try to understand what is the problem when we deal with this kind of situation. See, both the constructor is having same name. It is just like a situation whenever we have in our class two students with the same name. So the question is how we can identify them? We can identify them by their surname. So in this case, we will identify one constructor from another constructor by the argument or the parameter that it is using. So here, overloaded constructors have the same name, that is, same name with the class name, but different number of arguments they should have. So what is the meaning of different number of argument? Whenever we have more than one constructor, see here we have zero number of argument. And whenever we are defining any other constructor within a same class, say we have one argument. So they differs in number of argument. Also we can do one more thing. Say in this constructor we have one argument, and whenever we are defining the next constructor within the same class, we can change the number of argument. So here this constructor is having two argument and this constructor is having one argument. So basically here the point is overloaded constructor should have different number of arguments. This is number one point. Also, they have different data types while defining the arguments. Means, say one constructor is having integer type of argument and another constructor is having, say, float type of argument. So this is also possible. So as a whole, what is my point? Here, whenever you want to define more than one constructor within a class, then their parameter signature should be different. What is the meaning of parameter signature? The meaning of parameter signature is the number of argument and the type of argument vary. So this is the point that you have to remember. So today we will perform one coding on the basis of this constructor overloading. But before starting the code, we should understand what is the real life situation when we need constructor overloading. Now I will give you one example where constructor overloading is useful. So first I will tell you here what is the benefit of constructor overloading. Say we have one music database and we want to allow user to access song information on the basis of two criteria. So now here we want that our user should access this music database. But there will be two kind of user. The first user, we will define them as default user, and default user will get some limited information, that is the title, year and genre of the music, etc. And the second category of user, we will mark them as premium user. And they will get the full information about the music, that is title, year, genre, mood, tempo, etc. So these are the two categories that we want to support. So what we will do at that point of time, we will create one class, and this class name will be music class. And here, why we should use constructor overloading? Here, I will use one constructor with no parameter. So in this case, this constructor will handle the category number one, that is the default users. And then we will define another constructor with some parameter, and this constructor will handle the second category of user, that is the premium user. So this is the classical example of constructor overloading in real life scenario. Now I will write one code in which we will implement the concept of constructor overloading. Now here I have to include the IOStream header file, then using. Now we will perform the concept of constructor overloading. So in order to perform constructor overloading, we need a class. Say the class name is music. Now within this class, if I want to define the constructor name should be same as the class name. So here the constructor name should be music, and constructor will look like a method. So this is the first constructor. And now since we are performing constructor overloading, so we have to define another constructor. So now point number one, whenever we are defining more than one constructor within a class, then their parameter signature should differ. So what I will do, in this constructor I will pass no argument, and in this constructor I will pass one single argument of type integer. So here according to the definition, both constructor differs in their parameter signature. Now here I've discussed this in the previous class. Whenever we have constructor with no argument, it is known as default constructor. And in this default constructor, we will initialize variable with some static value. So here I am taking one variable a and I am initializing this variable with value 10. Now what is this a variable? In the previous class it was discussed that whenever we are going to initialize any variable inside the constructor, that variable must exist inside the class. That is, inside the constructor we will initialize class variable. That is, we should have a variable which is known as data member, and this data member should be initialized within the constructor. Now what happens if we have a constructor with the parameter? So here we also initialize the same variable with this parameter. How? I have discussed that for parameterized constructor, the number of data member means if you have one data member, then you have to initialize that data member inside the constructor. So there will be one parameter. This is number 1 point. Number 2 point, the parameter name should be different from the class variable name. So since class variable name is a, so here I am changing the parameter name as a1. And within this constructor, in the left side we will write the class variable, and in the right side we will write the parameter. So here inside the constructor we can print the values. So here we are printing the value of a, and here also I am printing the value of a. So constructor overloading is done. Now inside main function, first we have to create the object of this class. So here the class name is music and we can create any object of this class, say M. So here you have to remember one more important point, that is whenever we have object of a class, at the time of object creation the constructor is automatically called. Since we are creating the object inside the main, so the meaning of this is here the constructor is automatically invoked or called. Now in this case the question is we have two constructor. So by this line I am calling which constructor? So since we have only the class name and the object name, so in this case we are here calling the default constructor. Default constructor means the constructor with no parameter. However, to call the constructor with parameter, again we will create object with the different name of the same class. Say we are creating object of M1 and now we will pass one parameter. How many parameter? So here this constructor is having one parameter of type integer. So I will pass one integer value through this object to the parameterized constructor. So in this case here I am calling parameterized constructor. Now I have one more point to elaborate. If you have another constructor, say music, in this constructor say you are passing floating point value, say float y, and now inside this constructor what we will do, you have to assign some value to the class variable. So since we have float parameter in this constructor, so there should be one data member of type float in this class. So we should have a float data member, say y1. And here we will write first the class variable name and then the parameter name. So here the point is, again we have to call this third constructor. The rule is write the class name and then write the object name. But here, since the third constructor is of type parameterized and it is having one floating point value as an argument, so here I can pass any floating point value according to our choice. So this third parameterized constructor is called here. So this is the basic mechanism by which we can call the overloaded constructor, and here we can print the value of y1. So here just check the code. So we have one music class. Within this music class we have three overloaded constructor. The first one is the constructor with no parameter. Second one is the constructor with one integer parameter. And third one is the constructor with one floating point parameter. And inside this constructor, I am initializing a static value to the class variable. So here the class variable is A and I am initializing one static value A to this variable. Now for the second constructor, this same class variable is initialized by the constructor parameter. And for the third one, we have done the same thing. We have initialized this y1 class variable inside this constructor. So now in the previous class I have described what is the advantage of using constructor. See, constructor is used to initialize the object. So here whatever object we have, they are initialized by some value. This is the one point you have to remember. And also you have to remember, for calling a constructor we don't have to explicitly write object name dot constructor name. No, in this case whenever we define the object at this point of time, the constructor is automatically called. So this is all about constructor overloading. So now let's execute this code. So we have to save this code with .cpp extension, we know that. C.cpp. Now let's execute the code. In C++, we know that the class must end with semicolon. Now, I will tell you one more point. The most important point about the constructor. Whenever we are defining the class variables and the constructor, we have to remember we have to define the access specifier also. So in this case, we can use the access specifier as public. So if you miss this access specifier, there will be one error. See, another error I have, it is ambiguous. Yes, there is another problem. Yes, I will tell you what is that problem. But before that, now there is one interesting point that I can tell you. So in this case, what happens? We have output 10 and 2. We have output 10 and 2 because from here I am passing 2. Now see what is the problem over here. So here whenever I am defining another constructor and passing some floating point value, say y, and here we are just initializing this y1 which is equal to y, and from here we are just creating one object and we are passing some value over here, say this. So try to understand what is the problem we may face. See, it is showing that this constructor is not working properly. So here what I will do, I will take another parameter, say y2. And here I am taking another parameter, say float z. And here I am initializing y2 equal to z, and from here I am passing another value, say 8.5. So y1 here I am printing and here I am printing y2. So here we are getting the output of the three constructor. This last two are the floating point output from the third constructor. But now try to understand what was the reason behind the error. So this is the most important point you have to realize. Whenever I am defining constructor overloading, it was stated clearly that the parameter signature should be different. Parameter signature means the number of parameter and the type of parameter. Both must differ. So here try to understand, whenever I was defining one floating point parameter or argument over here, so here we have also having one integer type of argument. So one argument here and one argument here. Though they have different data types, so they will conflict. So at that point of time, we are facing error. So what we have done, try to understand, here we have no parameter. Here we have one integer parameter and here we have two floating point parameter. So for constructor overloading, the number of argument as well as the type of argument both must differ. Otherwise, it will give you an error. So now the concept of parameter signature is clear. So initially what I did in the demo session, I have shown it to you that I have defined only one floating point parameter. So since we have one integer parameter, and here we are defining one floating point parameter, so the number of argument matches. So at that point of time we are facing error. So this is the point you have to remember. So we can write one floating point parameter. So in that case we have to remember that we should not write any integer parameter over here. One integer parameter. So make it two, then you can define one floating point parameter. So number of parameter and type of parameter must differ. So either you can omit this one or make it two integer variable over here. So in your exam, you should not write that the parameter type should differ. No, the parameter type and the number of parameter both must differ. And at this point of time, for that reason, it is known as parameter signature. So whenever you are using the term signature, signature means number and type both. So now what is the definition of constructor overloading? Within a single class, if we have more than one constructor with different parameter signature, then it is known as constructor overloading. And one more point you have to remember, whichever constructor you are defining inside the class, that constructor must be public in nature. But there may be one question, that is, what if my constructors are public but the data members are private? Can we write this kind of code? Because according to my definition, the constructors must be public. So they are having public access specifier. But here I can define it, the data members, as private. So let's see what will happen. See, it is working absolutely fine. So here you have to understand this point also. That is, if you have any private data member inside the class, that data member can also be constructed inside the constructor, because all these data members are private in nature. However, you have to remember one point, whatever constructor you are defining, they must be public in nature. And if you forget to mention the access specifier for a constructor, then definitely you will get the error. So this is the most important point. So in your exam, if the question is asked, which kind of data member you can construct inside a constructor? So your answer will be public data members as well as private data members. Both kind of data members can be constructed inside the constructor.